What's up, guys? It's me, Lumos Theromax, and today we're here to actually discuss the new HBO series called The Last of Us. And as usual, I'm your host, Lumos Theromax. I'm jumping out of the norm to review some stuff that's definitely not comic book related, and I appreciate y'all for stopping by. So, as we get into something that's definitely out of the normal on the channel, I really appreciate you guys hanging out and giving me a shot on this one. That being said, let's get into it. So, The Last of Us is a pretty old game, but that doesn't change the fact that it is actually one of the most popular games for PlayStation as an exclusive that's ever really occurred before. Now, albeit the second one came in with some pretty interesting ideas and storylines, the first game is heralded as one of the best of all time, and it's definitely not wrong for doing so. I played it, as soon as I had seen just gameplay of it from a friend, and I was like, yo, not only is this verse whack as hell, but this game is wild. The mechanics were sick, the characters were awesome, and the story was pretty damn good. So it was really exciting to see an adaptation like this come out for something that especially was supposed to be on something like HBO, which is known for not necessarily holding back on whenever it comes to like a really rough content such as gore or violence, because the Last of Us universe is absolutely filled with these things to a pretty big extreme. At any point in time, if you died, you watched your character at certain points of time get like ripped apart by some of these creatures and some of these things within the universe. But here we are covering HBO's version of The Last of Us, and I do have to use the term HBO's version, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But there are some changes to how like a variety of things within the universe are. But before we get to those, let's talk about, were they respectful enough to Joel and Ellie? So when it comes to Joel's character, I think they did a pretty good job. I think the acting is pretty spot on. It's pretty fire stuff. And he even manages to sound like Joel at a few different points in time, just like in terms of how Joel's like actual voice sounds. And Ellie's no different. Ellie definitely doesn't look like Ellie, in my opinion, given it's kind of hard to one for one certain characters, especially when they're younger, like Ellie was. But it's definitely one of those things where Joel hits pretty hard in terms of what he's repping, to say the least. And Ellie, albeit she doesn't look like her, definitely sounds like her from time to time, which is pretty dope. And it definitely helps that sense of immersion within the context of the video games. And I give them a solid A whenever it comes to the acting cast so far. And we'll get into some of the fun features of the acting cast down the way as well. Now, there was a lot of changes that occurred in terms of how things started and what characters witnessed what towards the beginning of the outbreak. So like, spoilers also, in case y'all were wondering moving forward, Sarah, who is Joel's daughter, for some reason had like a whole experience next door. She wound up leaving the house. She wound up hanging out with a dog at one point in time. And she's actually at the neighbor's house whenever Joel finds her. And I'll admit, it's been a minute since I played The Last of Us, but I do not remember any of that action happening. Joel shows up and actually stops one of the neighbors from attacking Sarah, and that seemed pretty out of it in terms of like how far removed we are from like the video game context. And the creators have admitted that they are like, this is technically a separate canon entirely. Some of the mechanics of the verse even work differently. So it's not the end of the world or anything, but there are some changes. It's just something to keep note of for sure. Events happen in slightly different ways, which obviously happens all the time in video game to like movie or like TV show adaptations. Not the end of the world, but something to consider. It's definitely not a one for one. And things go pretty much the same whenever it comes to how the unfortunate end of Sarah came. It was pretty sad. I think it was executed much better in the video game in terms of the soldier taking orders from whomever and gunning down Sarah and Joel. But at the end of the day, its effectiveness was essentially the same. And it's pretty lit, not gonna lie either way, even if it's not that one-to-one representation. We were talking earlier about changes to the verse, and there was this one moment that I actually like almost paused during the show on. I was like, yo, wait a minute, that it would not work that way. Like, there has to be some form of change to the verse, otherwise like this just wouldn't have worked. And what was the change? Well, at one point in time, Tessa, who is a long time in the series, it almost feels like potential relationship with Joel. It's kind of odd, but in the game it definitely felt business. Definitely felt business. But that being said, they're rolling through this subway tunnel, and they find out that they like open up this door, and immediately there is one of the members of the humans who have been bitten by one of the clickers or one of the runners or one of the infected, no matter how you choose to look at it. And they had decayed so much they basically become this sprawling menagerie of fungi on the wall. And they both notice it, and they don't even immediately recognize that they should be putting on masks or anything like that, and there were no spores. And the point to which this person had degraded, there definitely should have been spores covering the entire room, and honestly probably Joel and Tessa would have been infected there. So it was very unfortunate to realize, like, yo, wait a minute. And then I thought to myself, yo, I wonder if they're not gonna do spores because like the actors don't want their faces covered by masks, which is like a very common thing inside like movies or TV shows or anything like that. People hate it when their faces are covered up with masks because it limits their exposure as an actor. And so it was actually my lady who actually looked up some information that points out, yeah, as a matter of fact, they changed the entire universe in terms of how the fungi work. They no longer will have spores at all, so don't expect that. But they have tendrils, apparently, that you can like mess with and trip down the way, that even creates some sort of hive mind. So we're looking at almost an entirely different kind of fungus in terms of how it operates within this universe that HBO is specifically making. Their excuse for it was like, oh, well, yeah, but if we had spores, essentially we would just, everybody in the world would be infected. And it's like, yeah, but that's not how it worked. Like, even in the game, like, that's not how it works. And even in your universe, it appears that this happens in like the course of a day. So like, regardless, it's everywhere. So that excuse was like the lamest excuse I've ever heard. But it works effectively the same, it's just not airborne, which is important to note, which means it's easier to combat, in my opinion, because there's certain parts of the game where if you didn't have a mask, you genuinely could not cross and you would have died. Now, another really cool thing that I noticed in the game, was like an awesome voice cast. They were 100% like spot on, and honestly, some of the characters are completely memorable. Like, it's so hard to forget some of the voice lines that they deliver. And in the TV show, they're definitely trying to go for that level of acting, to say the least. Now, Marlene, who is the leader of the Fireflies throughout the show, she sounded really familiar, and I couldn't help but notice it. She's actually, fun fact, the voice actress from the game. I was like, no way, that's crazy. I was like, I just thought the chick was doing like a hella good job. No, that's like actually Marlene from the game. It was mind blowing. Now, another fun extra random fact, if anybody's watched the Netflix series Hilda, the young girl who plays Ellie is actually the girl who plays Hilda in that. So it's funny to see her go from like a whimsical animated girl to like being the ruthless, savage kind of young teen known as Ellie. But it's a wild transition to see for her character. And after doing a little bit more digging, we actually found out that all of the voice actors from the game are actually going to be in the HBO series, which I thought was pretty wild and pretty unique. Now, I don't recognize or know most of the characters are going to be playing in the series. Now, it's unfortunate that they're not the characters from like the actual game, but it's still a really interesting thing to have in there and have as like a bonus to really be inside the verse. But as a general statement on the verse, I thought it was pretty dope, pretty good. Definitely looking forward to seeing more. And this was kind of the light, easy stuff, if I'm being honest. For anybody who's never really experienced the game before, we haven't even really gotten to the good stuff. And once we were out there and start seeing clickers and bloaters and some of the more crazy people, or even normal people trying to live inside this really twisted world, that's when, in my opinion, this stuff shines much harder than it does while you're stuck inside the militarized zones that are just honestly just like a miserable life. So, that being said, it's definitely worth checking out. I would give it the first episode probably a good 7 out of 10, which to me, a 5 is average. So if I'm giving a 7 out of 10, that means it is good to great. So definitely recommend checking it out. And I look forward to covering it on the channel and look forward to seeing what you guys really are repping whenever it comes to any of this kind of review style content. And thanks for giving me a shot whenever it comes to this action. And I guess with no further ado, later lanterns. Yo, there was also this scene right at the beginning that I was like, yo, this shit makes no sense at all. Yo, Sarah's next door hanging out, trying to return this dog back to her neighbors, and this deaf lady we'd come across earlier is totally infecting everyone. She looks up after being normal, and she's already got like massive amount of tendrils like hanging out of her mouth, man. It was like the silliest thing ever. Infections had not gotten that serious yet. Like runners don't have like tendrils like coming out of their mouths and being ooga booga spooky. That shit was just too funny though. The changes sometimes, man, it's just too whack.